this lecture, we'll be covering Chapter 3 on arguments by analogy. Arguments from analogy have this basic form. Premise 1. Object A has properties x, y, and z. Premise 2. Object B has properties x, y, and z. Therefore, object B likely also has property w, which is present in object A. Object A that serves as the basis of comparison is called the primary analog. Object B, the object argued about in the conclusion, is called the secondary analog. Our text provides excellent examples of arguments by analogy, so, as usual, be sure to read the chapter. The text examples include analogies between cars and humans, a Chippewa chief and Christopher Columbus, and a third analogy that is similar to the Paley argument I mentioned last lecture. I'll cover this last analogy after introducing Rule 12. Like any inductive argument, an argument by analogy will admit of varying degrees of strength. Analogies inherently include disanalogous aspects because they're comparisons of different things. The analogy given in this chapter between a human and a car is effective despite the many disanalogies between cars and humans. For example, humans are flesh and blood biological animals, while cars are mostly metal and mechanical objects. Nevertheless, the analogy works because the examples are similar enough in the relevant ways for the conclusion that they have something further in common to follow. The example in our text that is relevantly similar to the Paley argument I have discussed previously is the analogy between a house and the world, or the universe. In standard form, the argument goes as follows. Premise 1. Beautiful and well-built houses must have makers, intelligent designers and builders. Premise 2. The world is like a beautiful, well-built house. Therefore, the world also must have a maker, an intelligent designer and builder, God. There are a few issues with this version of the design argument for the existence of God that Paley's argument is able to avoid, as we'll see later in the course. Firstly, the premises use terms beautiful and well-built while describing the world. Not everyone sees the world as a beautiful and well-built place, and they may have some convincing arguments to support these views. Secondly, as our text points out, this argument also depends on our prior knowledge of houses, which Paley's argument is able to cleverly avoid. Thirdly, this argument is also a part-to-whole comparison that leaves it open to the old critique from David Hume. Is part of nature a rule for the whole? Think of how wide a step you've taken when you compared houses to the universe, and from their similarity in some circumstances inferred a similarity in their causes. Does not the great disproportion bar all comparison and inference? Hume correctly points out that this is a comparison of a part to a whole which is proportionally far greater, making the inference appear quite weak. But as we'll see later, Paley's argument will account for these difficulties.